We're in a series right now here at Nona titled The Way of Jesus, The Way, 7 Practices of Following Jesus. And it's really oriented around this question and kind of this conversation that we're having as a church. We can live life one of two ways. We can either do it our way, and sometimes that works out okay, or we can do it the way of Jesus. And when we do it Jesus' way, we really experience the promise that he gave us in John chapter 10, verse 10, when he talks about the full, abundant life that all of us are invited into. And so last week, we kind of looked at the first practice. We're going to look at 7 of them. The first practice of what it really looks like to connect with and to do life God's way. And we looked at the kind of idea of practicing intimacy with our Heavenly Father. And Jen brought the message. Can we just make some noise for Jen? What a great job she did last week. Incredible message. This week, we're going to talk about something that is, I think, something for many of us maybe we haven't discussed. I mean, you could have grown up in church your whole life, and what we're going to talk about today as a practice might be something new or something fresh. And then over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about how we relate to one another. So the first 2 weeks of this kind of series is all about how we relate to God, and the next 5 weeks is how we relate to one another. And in this process, we've got a decision to make every single week, which is this. We can either do it our way or we can do it Jesus' way. And we decided kind of in week 1 that the way that life is meant to be is best understood and discovered by the one who made us. And so we kind of ended our time with this phrase, Jesus, your way is better. In fact, I want to say that, on the count of 3 if we can. 1, 2, 3. Jesus, your way is better. Jesus, your way is better. I'm going to tell you, especially today, I'm going to come after something in your life today that you're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to do it your way or if you're going to do it Jesus' way. But I really do believe, and this is kind of in my own personal life as well, that when we do it Jesus' way, when we do it that way, all of a sudden, some of the stress that we feel and anxiety we feel in life, it actually dissipates. And I'm excited to kind of share with you something today that I think is all about what God wants for you, not what he wants from you. But before we get there, we've got to understand why this matters so much. And so in the 1950s, there was a doctor by the name of Dr. Meyer Friedman who began to do a bunch of studies. He's a cardiologist. And his kind of area of study was kind of in the 50s and 60s, leading into the early 70s, the nature of kind of people that are type A personalities and their overall health. And here's what he found over kind of decades of study. He actually published it in a book called The Type A Personality and Your Heart. He discovered that people that are high capacity, high workers, type A personalities, I mean, like they fold the laundry and they do it the right way. They make their bed, they're really aggressively moving forward in their career. They're upwardly mobile, educated, live in a place like Lake Nona. I mean, he's really describing our culture. This is what Meyer Friedman found. Meyer Friedman found that those people are far more likely to die of cardiac events. You may not know this, but like the rhythm of life that you're in right now is actually one that is going to lead to your demise, all right? That there's a reality between how our soul is and our rest and our rhythm and how it affects our physical well-being. That the speed that we do life actually has an impact on our actual physical well-being and how healthy we can be over the course of our life. And so if you're not a follower of Jesus, what we talk about today I think is still important because this is like medically proven that the way we choose to structure and orient our life has a profound effect on our general health and well-being. It became such a clear thing in the medical field that there's actually a diagnosis now that psychologists and physicians can use to kind of help people assess why they're so stressed and kind of the sense of where their body's at and all that kind of stuff. And it's called hurry sickness, okay? This is how Meyer Friedman describes it, okay? It's a real thing, people. All right, this is what he says. It's a continuous struggle, an unremitting attempt to accomplish, any accomplishers in the room? Or achieve, any achievers in the room? All right. Accomplish or achieve more and more things or participate in more and more events in, here's the mark, less and less time. And I just explained to you what it's like to live in Lake Nona, didn't I? That's what it is, right? I mean, there's more things to do than there is time to do them. There's more events to get your kids to, more opportunities, more stuff at work, more things that you got to do. And then we got this phone, right, that's supposed to help us. Like the phone's a time-saving device. Anybody knows it's not saving you time, like at all, right? It used to be you were available when you were at the office, and now you get random texts at 2 o'clock in the morning from your boss, and you're like, do I respond to it? Do I not? What do I do with all this kind of stuff? That's the world that we're in. And so there's an actual diagnosis called hurry sickness. And so here's the thing I want to kind of process just for a moment with you, is whether or not you have hurry sickness, all right? So we're going to go through 10 things here, a list, and let's just see how you do with this list, all right? Here's the first one. You might have hurry sickness if you find the fastest checkout line at Publix. Anybody do that? Yeah, right? And some of you guys are like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm just efficient, right? That's what you're saying. Right, yeah, okay. Here's the second one. You count cars in traffic. Anybody do that? Like you're driving and you're like, ooh, let me get into this lane because it's going to be a little bit quicker than that lane. Okay. You show up late to meetings, right? If you're like, I don't show up late, that's like, well, like 80% of you don't show up on time to church. All right, here's the next one. You drive over the speed limit. What's a speed limit? You talk fast, or people say you talk fast. You think about something else while someone's talking. I'm guilty. You're doing it right now in the message. You find yourself worried about things you can't control. You're constantly multitasking, like you're doing the laundry while you're on the phone, talking to your mama, while you're scrolling on Instagram, while you're watching The Office, right? You're just incredibly productive, right? You always have background noise on, whether it's the radio or the TV. Like driving in a car without sound is like one of the most, excruciating things for me personally. If you have some or many of these realities in your life, you might suffer from hurry sickness. It's a real thing. It has physical implications on your body and on your well-being and on your health. And it begs this question, man, why are we so stressed and hurried? Like, why? Like, does life have to be this way? I would submit to you that it doesn't. I would submit to you that we live in a cultural moment right now that wears busy as a badge of honor, right? When somebody asks you, how are you doing, right? No one is responding by saying, I'm living a mediocre life and I'm really coping with the fact that I have nothing to do by binge watching Netflix, right? No one says that, right? What do you say instead? Even if it's true, you say, oh my gosh, I'm so what? What's the word? I'm so busy, right? Yeah, we're hurrying from thing to thing, place to place, and we're trying to consume as much as we can, and the result of it, if we're honest, is we're stressed out and we're tired. So why? I think it really comes down to one word. I think it comes down to the word fear. I think you and I, if we're honest, we're a little bit afraid. We're afraid that we won't get where we want to be, We're afraid that someone will pass us by and get there first. We're afraid that we're going to disappoint someone or ourselves. And so we continually earn more and work more and do more so we can have more and buy more so we can prove to people that we don't really like, that we are somebody that they should pay attention to. We've got a phrase in our culture literally called FOMO. Have y'all heard of FOMO? Fear of missing out. So we're scrolling on social media, right? And we see like all of the other cool things that other people are doing, and we want that to be our life. While we're the most lonely and bored, that's when you're on social media, right? We're looking at people's curated best experiences, wishing it was our life. It's like, my gosh, like Sally's husband took her on a 7-month vacation to Italy. My husband won't even take me to Outback, Like you're kind of in that space, right? You spend some time like looking at, your high school friends and, it's like, man, by this time I thought I'd have 2 acres and, a nice house and a front porch. And instead I'm paying a stupid amount of money for this mortgage with a little yard where I'm, can literally mow my yard with a weed whacker because it's so small. And then, Sally and her romantic husband live out like, next to Chip and Joanna, and they've got shiplap, like we feel all of these things. And as a result of that, because of fear, you and I fall into the religion of our day, which is do more, consume more, make more, buy more. And we think in some way, shape, or form it's going to fulfill us, and it doesn't. And fear becomes the motivator. But God has words to say about fear. In fact, Paul, describing the heart of God, says this to his son in the faith, Timothy. He says, for God's not given us a spirit of fear, meaning that fear, that restlessness that drives so much of our habits, it's not from God. God doesn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And let's be honest, when you and I are stressed out and hurried, what's the first thing to go? A sound mind. We snap at people when we're stressed and hurried. We yell at people we love when we're stressed and hurried. We think the worst thoughts in our mind about our friends or about our coworkers when we're hurried and stressed. And God's invitation is to not live that way. In fact, Jesus has a better way. Jesus has a better way for you and for me. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's the second practice in this series. And like I said, this practice is going to be one that, if I'm honest, it is going to call you to reorient your life. This is not one of those messages where you're going to be able to walk out and say, I can just keep on doing what I'm doing, all right? Jesus has a better way, and it's the second practice that we'll talk about today. It's the practice of intentional rest. Write that down in your notes, intentional rest. Or another way of describing that is practicing Sabbath delight. I'll give you a title or maybe a definition for intentional rest. Intentional rest is this. It's a decision. It's a choice we make to stop work and to enjoy God with regularity. A decision we make to stop work and to enjoy God with regularity. Today, instead of just looking at one passage, I'm going to give us a biblical theology of the idea of intentional rest, or the word Sabbath. And what that means when I say biblical theology is we're going to start where the word is first mentioned, and we're going to draw a line through the entire library of Scripture, looking at what this word means in different iterations across the storyline. So we're going to start in the beginning, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, where we're first introduced to the idea of rest as intention. What we find in Genesis chapter 2, it's called our origin stories, is this. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them, meaning God has put into motion the process by which all of the earth will be created, everything that he's responsible for. And it says on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Now that word holy simply means the idea of set apart. And so you and I know what holidays are. That's the idea of holy day, holiday. Holidays, Christmas, holiday, Thanksgiving. What is it? It's just a day that's set apart. So what we find here in Genesis 2, and this is Moses who's writing this text. Moses is giving us a picture of how God did what he did. And he's saying, listen, God decided to take a day and rest. Now, mental note, it's not like God created Andromeda and he was like, oh my gosh, that was exhausting. Let me go take a nap. That's not what it means. What it means is that God, who is infinitely powerful and needs no rest, still chose to rest to serve as a model for me and you as to what a life of flourishing would look like. So we continue to draw the thread of this idea of rest, and then we get to Exodus chapter 20. And what you need to know about the first 5 books of the Bible, especially if you're new to the scriptures, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that's called the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Those first 5 books are written by Moses to give the people of Israel a sense of identity. And the reason why they need a sense of identity, of understanding who they are, is because for 400 years, they've been enslaved as captives in Egypt. If you enslave anyone for 400 years, you know what the first thing to go is? Their sense of identity. They no longer have an identity beyond the fact that I get up and I work every single day under the hand of Pharaoh, and if I disobey, I will lose my life. And even if I don't disobey, I still might lose my life. So after 400 years of captivity, the people of God, they enter into a space where they're now becoming free. And so these books that are sometimes hard to understand, they're simply God giving them their identity and who they are as people. And so God, speaking to these people who've been slaves for 400 years, all they've ever known is work and toil, says this. He says, remember the Sabbath day. The word Sabbath literally just means to stop or to cease. He says, remember this day that I've set aside by keeping it holy, set it apart. 6 days you should labor and do all your work. That's like a message that some of y'all need to hear. You work 6 days, all right, not 5. But the 7th day is a Sabbath. It's a day of rest to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Can I get a good amen to that kind of life? For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, but rested on the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. So God designed humanity to function and operate in this way, and God is reminding the people of Israel who have not done this for 400 years. Think about it. Generation after generation after generation after generation. They've forgotten who they are. They've forgotten what it means to be free. And he's saying, you're no longer slaves to Egypt. You are free people. You are no longer marked by what you make and what you consume and what you do. You're free. I feel like in the 21st century, we need to hear that as well. You are not marked by how much money is in your bank account, what letters are behind your name, and what zip codes you live in. That is not what makes you valuable. You are free. And so God institutes this rhythm of work 6, rest 1, a day fully stopping work so you can enjoy God and delight in him and others. And now, while this is a beautiful ancient practice, what God meant for blessing, religious rule makers turned into a burden. And here's how we know that. There was this promise of, hey, don't work for a day. And then a couple of decades later, you've got this thing called the Mishnah, which was a commentary on the scriptures that the Hebrew people had built. And the Mishnah came up with 39 different categories on what it meant to take a day off and rest. They added all of these rules, like you can only walk X amount of feet. You can only eat X kind of bread. You can only make certain kinds of meals. There was 39 different categories of rules. And what was meant to be a moment of rest now became a burden because you had to follow all these rules and make sure you did everything the right way. And now it wasn't 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. It was 7 days of work, just a different kind. And then Jesus enters into the story in Matthew 11. This is what he says. He says to an audience that feels the weight and the burden of being under the weight of all of these rules. And he says this, are you tired of the rules? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on this cheap religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take, look at this, a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Jesus enters into the story and he wants to reorient the people of Israel around what rest really looks like. And it's not keeping all these rules, which is what religious people do all the time. You know that, right? Doesn't matter what religious background you're in. It's like we take like the good pieces and then we come up with a bunch of ridiculous rules to make it no longer fun or enjoyable, right? And Jesus is saying, listen, I've come to remove all that and reintroduce you to what this is actually about. It's funny, if you look at Matthew chapter 11, in Matthew chapter 12, there are 2 stories immediately following these verses that are specifically about how Jesus interacts with the Sabbath. Now, you and I don't know that, right? Because what do we do when we read our Bibles, right? We stop at the end of the chapter, right? Or we pay attention to those little words up in bold, right? Called pericopes, and we read that little section and that's what we do. Mental note, chapters, verses, and those little headings, those never existed back in the day. We all added that later on because we need structure, right? Like that was not there. And it's important because what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 11 about the burden, he deals with in Matthew 12. That was meant to be read in completion and in succession. John MacArthur describes it this way. He says that Jesus, in this text that we just looked at, was talking about people who were under the burden of the oppressive, restrictive, Sabbatarian legalism. That word legalism means rules and regulations from which you could get no relief, from which you never were delivered from a guilty conscience. Jesus came, in case you're wondering, to kill dead religion and invite us into a way of relationship. In fact, that's what he says in Matthew 23 when he's looking at all these religious guys that have come up with all these rules. This is what he says to them. He says that you guys crush people with unbearable religious demands, and then you never lift a finger to ease the burden. He says, what sorrows awaits you teachers of religious law and you Pharisees, hypocrites, you fake people. You cross land and sea to make one convert, and then you turn that person into twice the child of hell you yourselves are. Anybody like, Jesus said that? Anybody like think of that? Yeah, it gives me permission to call your children of hell, like when they're acting up. Don't worry, I'll never do it to your face, just behind your back, all right? Notice this, Jesus has a place in his heart, right, for people that try to make things harder than they should be. He's like, that's not what we came to do. That wasn't the purpose or the plan. So the question is, how does Jesus interact with this thing called Sabbath, this holy day of rest? Well, here's what we know is that Jesus reintroduces us to the reason for the Sabbath, and he invites us to take a real rest. In 3 different accounts of Jesus' life, 3 different biographies, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, we see the same 2 stories recorded by 3 different people. And if you're a skeptic about faith, this is something you should pay attention to. Because 3 guys who died terrible deaths, not saying Jesus was a good teacher, but literally they died because they said, I saw him rise with my own eyes, in different places and in different times, write the same stories about how Jesus interacted. That's what you would call verifiable history. And that's the reason why you shouldn't just kind of treat the Bible like it's any book. It's documentation of historical narrative that actually happened. And so while we don't have time to go look at all of these, I want you to have all these texts because they all tell the same story, but from different perspectives. And we find this in Mark chapter 2, that this is how Jesus interacts with the Sabbath, this idea of a day of rest. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And then the Pharisees who saw this said to him and said, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Can everybody agree the Pharisees are the people you don't want coming to the party? Like they're those people. So they see these guys plucking grains and they're eating it and they're thinking, whoa, Jesus, get your guys in line. They're breaking the law. Well, here's the thing. They weren't breaking the law. They were breaking the Mishnah, which wasn't the law. The Mishnah was just a bunch of rules that people added to the original thing. And if you walked away from Jesus or faith because of people that added a bunch of original stuff to the original, a lot of new stuff to the original thing, welcome. We're glad that you're here. There is a way forward where you don't have to deal with all of that. So Jesus interacts with them, and this is how he responds. He answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. And then Jesus gives them the kicker. He says this, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Meaning, this day of rest isn't so that you can become a good religious person. The day of rest isn't for God. The day of rest is for you. This thing wasn't designed and instituted so that you could have another burden on your back. This was designed and instituted because you weren't made to go nonstop. You were designed for rest. Your body was made to take a deep breath, and it should happen every week. Listen to me. Practicing intentional rest isn't meant to be a burden. It's designed to be a blessing. In the same story, but from Matthew's perspective, Jesus just reminds everybody, in case you're wondering, this isn't just commentary that I've got on this ancient tradition. He says, if only you had known the meaning of I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you do not condemn the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Basically, Jesus is saying, in case you're wondering, this isn't my opinion on the Sabbath. I'm the one who created it. I know how it's supposed to work. You guys messed it up. Let me remind you, I made this for you. And then Jesus, because he's incredible, doesn't just say, what the Sabbath is about, but then he models it for us in his life. You got to know this, okay? Because I don't think we hear this growing up, like in American church often, usually because American churches are led by workaholics who don't want to admit that they need to take a break. But I think what's so interesting is that Jesus never in the Gospels discounts the Sabbath or the idea of a day of rest. He always manages it and has it a part of his life. Luke 4 tells us that Jesus went to the synagogue as was his custom, meaning he participated in Sabbath. And then in Luke 6, we see Jesus living out the Sabbath as well, this idea of rest. Jesus models rest for us, not our tradition or upbringing. This is huge, okay? Because some of us grew up with a tradition where we just work. Some of us grew up with an upbringing where you just work. You never take a break. The only break you take is that 5-day vacation every single year, right? To the same place. And while you're there, you spend time working, right? You are more, look at me, you are more than the tradition of our American culture that says that you've got to buy more and have more and do more. You're more than that. So here's Jesus' model of rest. You can look it up in the Luke chapter 6. This is what he does on the Sabbath. Jesus spends time with his friends. Jesus spends time in nature. Jesus, look at this, went on a leisurely walk. Notice it says that Jesus did not go running. All right, I don't know what's wrong with you people. I love this. Leisurely walk to my fridge to get some carrot cake. Amen, right? Notice Jesus was in gathered worship. This was a part of Jesus' rhythm. It should be a part of yours as well. Church on Sunday shouldn't be the thing that you do if you have time. It should be a natural part of how you engage and relate with others. And Jesus was using his gifts, and he was serving others. So the last thing I want to hear after this message is, well, Pastor, in order for me to have the Sabbath, I can no longer serve on Sunday. Like, that's not an option, okay? Jesus utilized his gifts and his abilities to bring value to the community that he was a part of. And then he spent time with his friends, and he did life with people he loved. And as we continue to draw the string of this idea of rest, the question then comes into mind, well, are you saying we've got to pick a particular day? And I want you to know, like, that's not what the text tells us. The storyline of Sabbath is not so much about the day, it's about something else. Paul actually comments on this in Romans 14, and he says this, one person might esteem one day as better than another, while another person might esteem all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in what? In his own mind. Meaning, this is not about the day. It's about the practice. You continue to draw the line, and the writer of Hebrews, who's writing to a Jewish Christian audience who would have understood Sabbath better than any of us ever could, understood the weight of the rules of the Mishnah as well, more than any of us ever could. This is what they say. The writer says, so then there remains, meaning it hasn't been taken away, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. So here's the idea here. They're saying, listen, when you put your faith in Jesus, you no longer have to work to earn God's favor or rest. You're no longer at war with God because you and God are right. But even as you put your faith in Jesus, that doesn't mean that this time of rest is no longer yours. The text says, let us therefore strive to enter that rest, meaning let's do everything we can to live a life that's in alignment with this idea of allowing our bodies and our soul to have a rhythm of rest so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. So pay attention to this. The day you rest is less important than the choice you make to practice it. So let me ask you this question. What day in your calendar, weekly, do you have set aside to simply delight in God and in people? What day is not filled with a task list and filled with the to-dos and filled with folding laundry and running errands and buying things and binge watching Netflix, because that never fills the soul? What day is set aside to do things you love with people you love so your heart can be stirred to remember there's a God who loves you? Because this day of rest, it's meant for you. And that's the reason why it's there. Here's the powerful thing about intentional rest. Stacey and I have been in this practice now for about a year and a half. We started it in the summer of 2018 as we kind of spent some time away and kind of recalibrated our life. The beauty of this practice for us is that it does exactly what Jesus promises will happen when you follow him. It reorients our hearts around self. It reorients our hearts around who God is. It reorients our heart around others, and it reorients our heart around a right understanding of the world. All of the things that were broken in the fall, all the things that were broken when we decided for the first time to do things our way, all of those things get somewhat restored, and the direction gets placed back into alignment. For us, a friend of ours recently asked us this question. She said, hey, how are you guys doing? She was talking to me in particular. And usually when I hear that question, my response is something along the lines of like, well, I'm doing, what would you say? I'm doing fine, right? I am busy, right? Like these are the words that we use. Here's what came out of my mouth, and I was surprised when I said it, but I really meant it. I said, I'm eerily rested. Eerily rested. And I said that in a time, in a season, this was a couple of weeks ago, when my wife went back to work full-time as an educator. So she's out of the home every single day, Monday through Friday, full-time educator. My 9, 7, 3, and 2-year-old are all in school. We get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We give them breakfast. We get them in the car. They all drive to school. Mama teaches all day. They come back home. We've got 2 kids in soccer right now, so that's soccer practice Monday, Wednesday, games on Friday, Saturday. We've got kids that are in band, so that's Tuesday, Thursday morning. We've got violin as well. Of the next 4 weeks, I'm traveling 3 of them, speaking at 2 different conferences outside of our home, okay? And just finished all of the final edits for the dissertation that I wrote last year and that got published, okay? And here's the reason why I tell you all this stuff, is that we understand what it's like to be overtaxed and busy, okay? You guys tracking with that? Like, we get it. But the reason why we can say that we're rested in the midst of a season of incredible busyness is our choice to utilize this practice. It's amazing what happens, look here, when you obey God and you trust him to do everything he needs to do with 6 and you give him 1. Look here, okay? Here's the question you got to process. Do you believe God can do more with your 6 days of work and 1 day of rest and trusting him? Do you think God can do more with that than he can do with your 7 days of disobeying him? And what we found is an incredible amount of rest, an incredible amount of peace in the midst of an incredibly busy season. And what I'm learning as we practice this process of intentional rest is this. For myself, my view of myself gets reoriented because I am more than what I do and buy, and I need to be reminded of that. And I'm reminded of that when we practice Sabbath. I'm reminded in my relationship with God that God's in control and I am not. God doesn't need me all of the time. He's perfectly okay with me taking a deep breath and taking a nap. I learn when it comes to relating to others that people are good gifts to enjoy. And when I'm doing stuff I love, like, man, our Sabbath runs from Friday to Saturday. That's our time of intentional rest. So it starts on Friday night, we wrap up our day, we go have dinner together as a family, we either have people over our home or we go out to eat, or what we'll do is we'll go to somebody else's house. That's my personal favorite because they cook and then I leave. Come on, somebody, right? But we always do the highlight of the week on Friday. And then on Saturday morning, we get up and we enjoy our time. And just so you know, our kids make their own breakfast on Saturday morning and we sleep in. And they eat Cheerios and M&Ms. And some of you are like, oh my gosh, you don't make them gluten-free pancakes. I don't, and it seems like they're doing okay. And then we go to our kids' games and we enjoy that because it's an opportunity to celebrate as a family. We don't do any work. We don't do any laundry. We don't clean up. Our house is a mess. It's a mess right now. You can't come over. It's a mess. And then we eat a great meal to wrap it up. And let me tell you, when I'm cutting into a perfectly seared ribeye, cut down the middle, medium rare, because that's how the Lord likes his steak cooked, when I do it that way, and I take that first bite, it drives me to worship because it's a reminder of what's to come. And some of you are living such busy lives, you don't even think about eternity. You forget because you're so consumed by here and now. And Jesus' invitation is, why don't you take a day every week to be reminded of how much you're loved, how much you're not needed for the world to go around, and how much it's going to be okay for you to just walk with me. So here are 4 questions I want you to process as we think about intentional rest. The first one is, what is your rhythm for intentional rest? Do you have one? Do you have a day a week where you shut off the phone, you do not respond to email, you don't fold the laundry, you let the dishes sit in the sink, and you just enjoy the people around you, and you enjoy the life God's given you with the people you love? When it comes to God, will you demonstrate that you trust him by resting? Here's what I find so interesting. Everybody wants to say, I trust God. Let me tell you this. You don't know if you actually trust God until you trust God with your finances and you trust God with your time. Those are the 2 things that when we fully release them, we've actually can admit or recognize that we trust God. When it comes to others, how will I enjoy the people I love? Man, God has set aside a 24-hour window of time for you to just go enjoy the people that matter the most to you. Are you taking advantage of that gift God's given you? And lastly, how will I enjoy God and hope for eternity? There's something beautiful about sitting there with my kids. I was at the Florida game yesterday, and I had my kids around me on my lap, holding them tight, thinking, my goodness, what a great gift God has given me. It's the best conversations. It's the best laughter. It's the best moments that happen when we set aside time of quiet, off the phone, off the email, face to face with the people we love and the God who loves us, where our souls get refreshed. Now, for many of us, you might be sitting here saying, well, I'm too busy for that. Well, let me ask you, how is the too busy life treating you? How's your soul? How's your heart? How's your physical body? And maybe doing it your way might have gotten you somewhere, but I promise you won't get you where you want to be. But doing it Jesus' way, man, it'll change the game. So here's your next step, all right? Pick a time. Pick a time. Doesn't matter what day. And doesn't matter if it's 24 hours. When Stacey and I started, it was 3 hours. That's all we could do. We are still working on our practice and just now getting to a place where we've given God a day. Pick a time. Saturday mornings from 9 to 12, honey, you take the kids. I'm going to go and, do what I need to do to just get filled up. And then you can come back and you get the kids for the afternoon. Whatever it is, pick a time and set it aside. Here's the second thing. Pause your work. No phone, no email. Look at me. You are not a slave to your boss. Your boss does not own you. Take a deep breath. Set some boundaries. And lastly, prioritize delight. Do the stuff you love without shame or guilt. Eat the stuff you love without shame or guilt. Spend time with the people you love without shame or guilt, because God is not a God of shame or guilt. Pick a time, pause your work, and prioritize delight. I love how Ruth Haley Barton talks about starting new things. She says this: feel free to do something before you can do everything. Pick the one thing you can do and do it with all your heart. Intentional rest is not because God wants something from you. It's because he wants something for you. A life of abundance, wholeness, and joy. So let me ask you this question. If Jesus gave himself room to rest, will you? Would you stand and pray with me?